Well, hello, sixth graders. Here we go again. We're coming to the end of the year, and naturally, to end the year, we're going to be doing Australia. And not only just Australia, guys, but some of the island groups that are around Australia, countries like New Zealand, but also countries in Melanesia as well. All right. So we're going to make our way through the practice map today because since we're down the last 2 weeks of school, I want to get right to the practice map. And let's see how that looks. Well, there is the practice map, guys. This is the one you have. I will put one up for those of you who do not have it. And if you look at number 1 on your practice test, you will see that is the island of New Zealand, right? The 2 islands of New Zealand. For you Lord of the Rings fans, this is where The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, they shot most of the movie because there's so much different terrain in New Zealand, but it's a very mountainous country as well. Um, Interesting place in many ways. But so whenever you look at Lord of the Rings or you ever watch those films, you're seeing that mainly set in New Zealand. The capital of New Zealand is Wellington. It's the name of a famous British lord, Lord Wellington. Okay, up next for all you water drinkers out there, this is Fiji. This is where Fiji water actually comes from. All right. That little island, number 2 up there, is Fiji. The capital is Suva. And that's part of Melanesia. Basically, 5, 4, 3, and 2 are part of Melanesia. So that's Fiji, and the capital there is Suva. And that is actually where Fiji water. Interestingly, as I learned from a young man who did a presentation on Fiji a couple of years back, he was telling me that, in fact, a lot of the people who live on Fiji can't get fresh water. They have actual tough access to fresh water, and yet they export huge amounts of their famous Fiji water to us. This one is Vanuatu. It's a part of Melanesia. I choose this one mainly for one reason. I actually taught with a person, a woman who was a French teacher back at my school I taught at in Massachusetts, and she was from Vanuatu. And I was always amazed. She was always amazed that I even knew about, and that nobody she'd ever met had known what Vanuatu was. But I had taught geography, and I was in there, and the capital is Port Vila. Um, but though that little island group right there, the little archipelago, that is Vanuatu. I guess there was a Survivor episode. I've never watched Survivor ever. It's that CBS television show, but there was a Survivor episode in Vanuatu. All right. Now we go on to the Solomon Islands, right? Why do I include the Solomon Islands? Because there's an island in particular on there called Guadalcanal, which was a really pivotal island for the United States in World War II. So if you're ever, in the war in the Pacific against Japan, so if you're ever studying World War II, you will learn about the Solomon Islands because that is where Guadalcanal is, and Guadalcanal was a major strategic island during World War II in the Battle of Japan against Japan. Okay, up next is number 5. It's the country called Papua New Guinea. This is one of the poorest and most undeveloped countries in Melanesia. In fact, it is the poorest and most undeveloped country in Melanesia and in the world. There's one major city, and that's the capital, Port Moresby. But it's very much a tribal society, very unusual, and a lot of their tribal customs still haven't changed all that much. We'll learn more about this. It's kind of a sad place. We'll learn more about it when I do the lecture on the Australia and Oceania. All right, number 6, we're getting into the states of Australia. And right now, this is a territory. There are states and territories. There are 2 territories. You'll learn about that in a second. Number 6 is the Northern Territory. And that is where many of the Aboriginal people, the people who originally have basically lived in Australia for about 45,000 years, millennia, literally going all the way back to primitive times. These people have lived on Australia, and they're the people who kind of got replaced by the Europeans when the Britain came in. and made it to Australia. And that is their homeland is pretty much in the Northern Territory. The capital city of the Northern Territory is a little city called Darwin, which is right up there on the coast of the letter C, the Gulf of Carpentaria. Darwin is right up in there. So that's sort of an Aboriginal homeland, the Northern Territory. Western Australia has only one major city, and most of Western Australia, guys, is desert. Victoria Desert, the Great Sandy Desert. If you look at your features map of Australia, Victoria Desert, you will see all of the deserts that are out in Western Australia. In fact, after Antarctica, this is the driest continent on Earth. This is it's a very much an arid and desert-like climate. And it's the only other continent that's completely within the southern hemisphere, except for Antarctica, obviously, which is at the South Pole. But all the other continents are partially in the northern hemisphere, except for Australia. But the little city of Perth is on the coast. But most of that territory, most of that region of that state is desert. Then you have South Australia with the wonderful name of the city, Adelaide. That is another very dry area as well. And now as we move to the east, that is where, even though the population is very thin, if you look on your population map in your atlas, most of this place is like 2.5 people per square mile, the vast majority of the country. When we get into number 9, 10, 11, and 12, there is a greater location. One of the wettest areas, in fact, the wettest area in Australia is in Queensland. It's on that northern coast of Queensland, number 9 there. That is one of the wettest areas. It gets about 300 inches of rain a year, really substantial amount of rain in that northeast coast of Queensland. The capital of Queensland is Brisbane. All right. Up next is New South Wales. Wales, because this was an English territory, this is named for Wales back in the United Kingdom. So it's called New South Wales. The capital here is the one that everybody thinks is the capital of Australia, but it is not. Sydney is not the capital of Australia. We're going to get to that in a second. But Sydney is the home of that amazing architectural feat, the Sydney Opera House. Right, so that is the capital of New South Wales, and I'm sure you found that on your map as you're working on your maps right now. Now, number 11 is the other territory. There's the Northern Territory, and then what's called the ACT, and that's the Australian Capital Territory. All right, kind of similar to what happened in the United States. I believe it was Melbourne and Sydney that really wanted to be the capital of Australia. They thought they were the two biggest, most important cities. They wanted to be part of the capital of Australia. So to settle that, they kind of did what they did in Brazil. They moved the capital inland somewhat. It's not a particularly, Sydney is 10 times as large in terms of population as Canberra. That's the capital. You see it there, Canberra. That is the capital of Australia, and that is a separate territory. The ACT stands for Australian Capital Territory. Up next is the Victoria, which is named for Queen Victoria, one of the longest reigning monarchs in English history, now just recently replaced by the current monarch, Elizabeth II, as the longest reigning monarch in English history. There's that other city, Melbourne, and number 12 is Victoria. That is that region, and it is Melbourne. And number 13, for all you Looney Tune fans, that's Tasmania. That is the island of Tasmania. And if you've ever watched the Looney Tune cartoons with the Tasmanian devil, that is where that particular animal resides. I've always been a big fan of the Tasmanian devil on the cartoons. So that is Tasmania, and the capital there is Hobart. Now we're going to go quickly on to the features. Tasman Sea, named similar to Tasmania. There was an explorer named Abel Tasman. He was a Dutch explorer, and he was the one who discovered, if you will, this region of the world, and sailed around it and explored this region. So that sea between New Zealand and Australia is named for Tasman, Abel Tasman. Then we have the Coral Sea. That's number B. And why the Coral Sea? Well, you'll see that giant dotted line that's in the middle of the Coral Sea there. That is the Great Barrier Reef, well over 1,000 miles long. A giant living land feature, if you will, or a feature of the world. So the Coral Sea is right by the Great Barrier Reef, which is the largest coral reef in the world, right there. C is the Gulf of Carpentaria. I've always loved that little shape there. It's obviously a gulf, very much surrounded by land in many regards. And that is cutting into the north right there, letter C. Letter D is the Arafura Sea. Again, that's just south of Papua New Guinea, or the island of New Guinea. And there it is between Australia and New Guinea. E is the Timor Sea. Right there. The islands up there are East Timor. There's a really struggling territory, East Timor. There was a great deal of persecution of Christians on that island, but that's another story. But that is near that Timor Sea, which is East Timor is the name of that island just north of it there, just north of the letter E. And then finally, F is the Great Australian Bight. Now, what is a bight? It is basically a bay, a very extended bay, a very large bay that goes across. That's what a bight is, B-I-G-H-T. All right, so that is the famous Great Australian Bight, a large basically bay, a very. You'll notice it's greater in width than it is in depth, but it's generally an area of calm water. So it's like basically a bight is like a very big bay. So that is our tour of the practice map. Make sure you get all of your spellings down and your pronunciations down. And thank you for listening.